Herr Sesemann went into the dining room, and Sebastian made his appearance. Herr Sesemann had not failed to observe that Sebastian and Fraulein Rothenmeier were not the best of friends, so he had his suspicion. "Come here, Sebastian," he said, beckoning the servant to enter. "Now tell me honestly, have you not yourself been playing the part of a ghost in order to tease Fraulein Rothenmeier a little? Tell me." "No, not on my word. You must not think such a thing. I myself have not felt at all comfortable about the matter," replied Sebastian with unmistakable frankness. "Well, if that is the case, I will show you and the brave Johann tomorrow how ghosts look by daylight. Shame on you, Sebastian, a strong young fellow like you running away from ghosts. Now you go at once to my old friend, Dr. Rebaud. Give him my compliments and tell him he must come here without fail tonight at 9 o'clock. I've come home from Paris on purpose to consult him. It is such a serious matter that he must spend the night with me. He must make his arrangements to do so. Do you understand, Sebastian?" Yes, indeed. Herr Sesemann may be sure that I shall do as he says." Sebastian left the room, and Herr Sesemann returned to his little daughter to quiet her fears about the ghost, which he was going that very day to put it in its true light. Punctually at 9 o'clock, when the children had gone to sleep, and Fraulein Rothenmeier had retired, the doctor appeared, showing, still under his grey hair, a very fresh face and two bright, kind, twinkling eyes. He looked somewhat anxious, but as his friend greeted him, broke into a hearty laugh and said, clapping him on the shoulder, "Well, for one who needs to be watched with, you look fairly hearty, old friend." "Have patience, my dear doctor," replied Herr Sesemann. "The one you have to watch with will look worse when we have caught him." "What? A sick person in the house, and one that must be caught? Far worse, doctor, far worse. A ghost in the house. The house is haunted, my friend." And the doctor laughed aloud. "Yes, a fine state of affairs, doctor," continued Herr Sesemann. "It's a shame that my friend Rothenmeier cannot enjoy it. She is convinced that a former Sesemann is wandering about here and atoning for some dreadful deed." "Oh, how did she find out about it?" asked the doctor, still very much amused. Herr Sesemann now told his friend about the whole matter, and added that in order to be prepared for whatever might happen, he had left 2 well-loaded revolvers where they were to watch. For either the affair was a very undesirable joke, which possibly some of the servants' acquaintances were playing in order to frighten the people in the house during the master's absence. In that case, a little scare, such as a good shot into the air, could not be unwholesome, or else it was a case of thieves who had taken this means to make the inmates of the house think they were ghosts, in order to be safer later, as no one would dare to venture forth. If this were so, a good weapon might come in handy. During this explanation, the gentleman had gone downstairs and entered the same room where Johann and Sebastian had watched. On the table lay 2 revolvers and 2 candlesticks, each holding 3 lighted candles, stood in the center, for Herr Sesemann did not care to await the ghost in a dim light. Well, the door was now partly shut, so that not too much light need to shine out in the hall to frighten away the ghost, and then the gentlemen seated themselves comfortably in their easy chairs and began to talk about all sorts of things, now and then taking a little refreshment, and so the clock struck 12 before they were aware of it. "The ghost has spied us out and is not coming tonight," said the doctor. "Have patience, it may come at 1 o'clock," replied his friend. And they went on with their talking. It struck 1. It was perfectly still all about. Even on the street there was no sound to be heard. Suddenly, the doctor lifted his finger. "Sst, Sesemann. Don't you hear something?" They both listened. They heard the bar softly but quite distinctly push back. The key turned twice in the lock, and the door opened. Herr Sesemann reached for the revolver. "You're not afraid?" said the doctor, rising. "It is better to be cautious," whispered Herr Sesemann. Seizing a candlestick in his left hand and the revolver in his right, he followed the doctor who had preceded him, likewise provided with lights and a revolver. Quickly and silently they stepped out into the hall. Through the wide open door the pale moonlight came in and lighted up a white form which stood motionless on the doorsill. "Who's there?" the doctor thundered forth, so that it echoed through the entire length of the hall, and both gentlemen with lights and weapons went toward the figure. It turned around and gave a little scream. There stood Heidi, with bare feet, in her white nightclothes, looking confused at the bright lights and the firearms, and shivering and trembling from head to foot like a little leaf in the wind. The gentlemen looked at each other in greatest astonishment. "I really believe, Sesamon, that it is your little water-carrier," said the doctor. "Child, what does this mean?" asked Herr Sesamon. "What are you going to do? Why have you come down here?" White as snow from fright, Heidi stood there and said, scarcely able to make a sound, "I don't know." Then the doctor stepped forward. "Sesamon, the case belongs to my domain. Go and sit down in your easy chair in there for a while. I will first of all take the child back to where she belongs." Whereupon he laid his revolver on the floor, took the trembling child by the hand, as a father would, and led her upstairs. "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid," he said kindly as they went up. "Only be very quiet. There's no harm done, so never mind." When they were in Heidi's room, the doctor placed his light on the table, took Heidi in his arms, laid her in her bed, and covered her up carefully. He sat down in a chair by the bed and waited until she was somewhat calmer and did not tremble in every limb. Then he took Heidi's hand and said soothingly, "There now. Everything is all right. Now tell me, where did you want to go?" "I didn't want to go anywhere," asserted Heidi. "I did not go down there myself. I was only there all at once." "Indeed. And did you dream anything in the night, do you know, so that you saw and heard something very clearly?" "Oh, yes, every night I dream, and always the same thing. I think I'm with my grandfather, and I hear the fir trees roaring outdoors, and I think, now the stars are sparkling so brightly in the sky, and I run swiftly and open the door of the hut, and it is so beautiful there, but when I wake up I'm always in Frankfurt still." And Heidi began to struggle, and to swallow down the lump that rose in her throat. "Mm-hmm. And do you have any pain anywhere, in your head or in your back?" "Oh, no, only something presses here all the time like a great stone." "Mm. Somewhat as if you had eaten something, and then afterward wished you could give it back again." "No, no, not like that, but so heavy, as if I must cry hard." "Indeed. And then do you cry right out loud?" "Oh, no. No, I daren't do that. Fraulein Rothenmeier has forbidden that." "Then you swallow it down till another time, don't you? Really? Well, you like to stay in Frankfurt, do you not?" "Oh, yes," she replied faintly, but it sounded as if she meant the opposite. "Hmm. And where did you live with your grandfather?" "Always on the Arm. It is not particularly pleasant there, but rather dreary, is it not?" "Oh, no. It's so lovely there, so lovely." Heidi could say no more. The recollection of it all, the excitement she just passed through, and the long restrained weeping overpowered the child. The tears rushed from her eyes in streams, and she broke into loud, violent sobbing. The doctor rose. He laid Heidi's head gently on the pillow and said, "There. Now cry a little. It can do no harm. And then go to sleep, and be happy in your sleep. Tomorrow everything will be all right." Then he went downstairs. When he was once more in the room where they had been watching, he drew an easy-chair opposite his waiting friend and explained to him, while Herr Sesamon listened with eager expectation. "Sesamon, in the first place, your little protégée walks in her sleep. All unconsciously, she has opened the door every night like a ghost, and put all your servants into a fever of fright. In the second place, the child is wasting away from homesickness, so that she is almost reduced to a little skeleton, and will soon be entirely so. Something must be done for her at once. For the first evil and for the nervous excitement existing in a high degree, there is but one remedy, namely, to send the child immediately back to her native mountain air. For the second, there is but one medicine, and that the very same thing. So the child must be sent home tomorrow. That is my advice." Herr Sesemann rose from his chair. He walked up and down the room in the greatest excitement. Then he exclaimed, "A sleepwalker! Sick! Homesick! Wasted away in my house! All this in my house! And no one noticed it, or knew anything about it! And do you think, doctor, that I will send the child who came fresh and healthy into my house back to her grandfather miserable and wasted away? No, doctor, you cannot expect that. I can't do that. That I will never do. Take the child in hand, put her under treatment, do what you like, but make her sound and healthy, and then I will send her home if she wants to go. But first give her your aid." "Sesemann," replied the doctor earnestly, "think what you're doing. Her condition is no illness that can be cured with powders and pills. The child has no delicate nature. If you send her back now to the bracing mountain air, to which she is accustomed, she will be perfectly well again. If not, you would not like to send her back beyond all help to her grandfather, or never send her back at all, would you?" Herr Sesemann stood still in astonishment. "Well, if this is your advice, doctor, then there's only one way. It must be followed immediately." With these words, Herr Sesemann took his friend's arm and walked about with him to talk the matter over still further. Then the doctor started to go home, for much time had passed during their conversation, and the bright morning light was coming through the house door, which was opened this time by the master of the house. Herr Sesemann climbed the stairs in the greatest excitement and went with a firm step to Fraulein Rothenmeier's sleeping room. There he rapped so unusually loud on the door that the good lady woke from sleep with a cry of terror. She heard Herr Sesemann's voice outside. "Pray hasten to come into the dining room. Preparation must be made immediately for a journey." Fraulein Rothenmeier looked at her clock. It was 4:30 in the morning. She had never risen at such an hour in her life before. What could have happened? Curiosity and anxious foreboding made everything she touched go wrong. She made slow progress in dressing, for she kept hunting about uneasily in her room for the things she had already put on. Meanwhile, Herr Sesemann went the entire length of the hall and furiously rang every one of the bells used to summon the different servants, so that in each separate room a terrified form jumped out of bed and hurried to dress. For all, and one and all, had the same thought, that the ghost had seized the master of the house, and this was his call for help. So they came down one after another, each looking more terrified than the last, and stood in surprise before the master of the house, for he was walking up and down the room looking fresh and cheerful, and not at all as if a ghost had frightened him. Johann was immediately sent to put the horses and carriage in order, to be brought around later. Tinette was ordered to awaken Heidi at once and make her ready to take a journey. Sebastian was ordered to hasten to the house where Heidi's aunt was at service and to bring her back. Fraulein Rothenmeier had meanwhile succeeded in getting dressed, and everything was all right except her headdress, which was on crooked, so that from a distance she looked as if her face was on backward. Herr Sesemann ascribed her perplexing appearance to the fact that she had been awakened so early, and proceeded at once with the business. He explained to the lady that she was to get a trunk without delay, and to pack all the things that belonged to the Swiss child. Herr Sesemann usually spoke of Heidi in this way, as her name was somewhat unfamiliar to him, and also a good part of Clara's clothes, that the child might have everything that was necessary to take with her. But all this must be done quickly and without stopping to question. Fraulein Rothenmeier stood as if rooted to the floor, and stared at Herr Sesemann in amazement. She had expected that he was going to tell her in confidence some horrible story of his ghostly experience the night before, and she would not have been displeased to hear it now in the clear morning light. Instead of that came these very commonplace and particularly inconvenient commands. She could not at once overcome her surprise. But she just stood there, speechless, expecting something further. But Herr Sesemann had no intention of making further explanations. He let the lady stand where she was and went to his daughter's room. As he supposed, the unusual stir in the house had awakened her, and she was listening to everything and wondering what was going on. Her father sat down by the bed and told her what the ghost really was, and that in the doctor's opinion Heidi was in a very bad condition, and that her nightly wanderings would become more extensive, and perhaps she might climb up to the roof, and that would be very dangerous. So he had decided to send the child home at once, for he could not be responsible for her, and Clara must be content, for she could see that this was very necessary. Clara was painfully surprised by this news, and at first wanted to find some way out of the difficulty, but it was no use. Her father remained firm in his decision, but he promised to take Clara the following year to Switzerland, if she would be reasonable now and not grieve. So Clara yielded to what could not be helped, and she asked that Heidi's trunk should be brought into her room and packed there, so she might put some of the things in that she wanted Heidi to enjoy. And this her papa willingly granted. Indeed, he even encouraged Clara to give the child a fine outfit. Meanwhile, Aunt Didi had arrived and stood with great expectation in the entrance, for to be summoned at this unusual time must mean something extraordinary. Herr Sesemann went out to her and told her how it was with Heidi, and that he wished she would take the child home at once that very day. The aunt looked very much disappointed. She had not expected such news. She still remembered very distinctly the parting words the uncle had spoken to her, never to come before his eyes again, and having taken the child to him and then brought her away, it did not seem advisable to take her back again. So she did not consider the matter long, but said with great earnestness that unfortunately it would be quite impossible for her to take the journey that day, and the next day she could think of it still less, and the day after that it would be utterly impossible on account of the work to be done then, and after that she would be no better able to go. Herr Sesemann understood the aunt's excuses and dismissed her without saying anything further. Then he summoned Sebastian and told him that he was to prepare himself immediately to take a journey. He was to go that very day with the child as far as Basel, and the next day to take her home. Then he could return at once. He would have no statement to make, for Herr Sesemann was sending a letter to the grandfather which would explain everything. "There is one thing more of great importance, Sebastian," said Herr Sesemann in conclusion, "and I want you to look out for it carefully. I am acquainted at the hotel in Basel, the name of which I have written down here on my card for you. Show my card there, and a good room will be given you for the child. You must provide for yourself. Go first into the child's room and fasten all the windows so securely that they cannot be opened only with great force. When the child is in bed, go and fasten the door outside, for the child wanders around in the night and might run into danger in a strange house if she went out and tried to open the house door. Do you understand?" "Aha, that was it, was it? That was it!" exclaimed Sebastian in great surprise, for a great light had just been thrown on the ghosts. Yes, that was it, and you are a coward, and you can tell Johann that he's another. Of all of you, together, a ridiculous set of men." Having said this, Herr Sesemann went to his room and sat down to write a letter to the homuncle. Sebastian stood amazed in the middle of the room, and repeated over and over again to himself, "If only I hadn't let that coward of a Johann pull me back into the room, but had gone after the little white figure as I undoubtedly should have done." For now the bright sunshine distinctly lighted up every corner of the dark room. Meanwhile, Heidi, entirely unsuspicious of what was going to happen, stood waiting in her Sunday frock, for Tinette had merely aroused her from sleep, taken her clothes out of the closet, and put them hurriedly, without saying a word, put them on her. She never talked with the ignorant Heidi, for she considered her beneath her notice. Herr Sesemann walked with his letter into the dining room, where the breakfast was already served, and asked, "Where is the child?" Heidi was called. When she approached Herr Sesemann to say good morning to him, he looked into her face inquiringly. "Well, what do you say to it, little one?" Heidi looked up at him in amazement. "You don't know anything about it even now?" said Herr Sesemann, laughing. "Well, you're going home today, right away." "Home? repeated Heidi, unable to speak aloud, and turned white as snow. For a little while she could hardly get her breath. She was so surprised by the unexpected news. "Don't you want to know something about it?" asked Herr Sesemann, laughing. "Oh, yes, I do." She was now able to gasp, and she turned deep red. "Good, good," said Herr Sesemann encouragingly, while he seated himself and motioned to Heidi to do the same. "And now eat a hearty breakfast, and then into the carriage and away." But Heidi could not swallow a mouthful, although through obedience she tried to force herself to eat. She was in such a state of excitement that she did not know whether she was awake or dreaming, or whether she would now suddenly awaken and be standing at the door in her nightgown. "Sebastian must take plenty of luncheon," said Herr Sesemann to Fraulein Rothenmeier, who was just entering the room. "The child cannot eat, of course. Go in to Clara until the carriage comes," he added kindly, turning to Heidi. This was what Heidi wished, and she ran out of the room. In the middle of Clara's room stood a huge trunk with the cover still wide open. "Come, Heidi, come," Clara called out to her. See what I have had packed for you. Come, do you like it?" And she showed her a quantity of things, dresses and aprons and underwear and sewing materials. "And see here, Heidi." And Clara held up a basket triumphantly. Heidi peeped in and jumped high in her delight, for inside lay 12 lovely, round, white rolls, all for the grandmother. The children in their glee entirely forgot that the moment had come for them to part, and when suddenly the call was heard, "The carriage is ready!" there was no time left to be sad. Heidi ran to her room. Her beautiful book from the grandmamma must still be there. No one could have packed it. It lay under her pillow, for Heidi could not be parted from it day or night. That was laid in the basket on the bed. Then she opened her closet to see if there was anything else left that had not been packed. To be sure, the old red shawl still lay there, for Fraulein Rothenmeier had not thought it worth packing. Heidi wrapped it around something else and laid it on top of the basket, so that the red parcel was very plainly to be seen. Then she put on her fine hat and left her room. The two children had to say a speedy farewell, for Herr Sesemann was already there to take Heidi down to the carriage. Fraulein Rothenmeier stood at the head of the stairs to bid Heidi good-bye. When she noticed the strange red bundle, she took it quickly out of the basket and threw it on the floor. "No, Adelheid," she said, still finding fault. "You cannot leave this house so. You do not need to carry off such a thing as that. Now, good-bye." After this, Heidi did not dare to pick up her bundle again, but she looked beseechingly at the master of the house as if she were having her greatest treasure taken away from her. "No, no," said Herr Sesemann in a very decided voice. "The child shall carry home whatever gives her pleasure, and if she takes away kittens or turtles, we will not get excited about it, Fraulein Rothenmeier." Heidi quickly picked up her bundle from the floor, and her eyes beamed with gratitude and pleasure. When Heidi reached the carriage, Herr Sesemann held out his hand to the child and said to her with friendly words that she must think of him and his daughter Clara. He wished her a happy journey, and Heidi thanked him very prettily for all the kindness he had shown her, and finally said, "And I leave 1,000 goodbyes to the doctor, and many thanks to him, for she had noticed how he had said to her the night before, 'And tomorrow everything will be all right.' Now it had all come true, and Heidi thought he was the cause of it." Then the child was lifted into the carriage, and the basket, and the lunch-box, and Sebastian followed. Herr Sesemann called out once more in a friendly voice, "A pleasant journey!" and the carriage rolled away. Soon after, Heidi was sitting in the train and holding her basket firmly in her lap, for she would not let it out of her hands for a moment. The precious rolls for the grandmother were inside, and she had to watch them carefully and delight her eyes with a look at them every now and then.